Hey everybody, so today we're going to talk about everything jigs, and I got to tell you that jigs are absolutely my go-to bait if I'm looking to catch larger than average fish, or I'm fishing a tournament for a lot of money, or I just want to feel that thump on my rod. Like, that's the most beautiful feeling in the entire world, when you feel your line just jump. So I want to go through jigs here today, and the first one I'm going to talk about is a finesse jig, and without a doubt it has been the most productive and best fish catching jig, no matter if I go from New York to Florida to South Carolina to Texas, wherever I go. The Chompers finesse jig is absolutely the #1 jig. And a couple things about it, you'll notice that, man, this jig looks weird, right? Because it's got like only half a skirt. But what makes this jig so special, so when it falls in the water, the skirt up top slows the bait down, okay? And with a smaller profile, okay, the fish just really eat this jig. So I fish it on a cast, I fish it on flipping, I fish it on trees, I fish it on jocks, anywhere, okay? And the next type of jig that I really want to talk about, okay, is a swim jig. They've become extremely popular, and this would be a swim jig that does not have a blade. So there's really two different types. There's a bladed swim jig and then a non-bladed swim jig. So swim jigs kind of came about in the Midwest, fishing the upper Mississippi River. One of my absolute favorite swim jigs is the Dirty Jigs, okay, swim jig. And the thing that makes a swim jig a little different, the profile of the head is very narrow. You notice that the eye doesn't have a big gap here. So what that's for is when you're fishing it through vegetation, it doesn't get caught on the vegetation. Also, it has a little bit lighter weed guard, so you can set the hook better on the fish. To fish it, you simply cast it out, hold your rod tip up high, and reel, okay? Typically what you'll find is that you'll get a bite one or two ways. Either the rod will completely rip out of your hand, or what's gonna happen is that you're gonna lose contact. The fish is gonna come up from behind the bait and put slack in your line. So swim jigs. The other one that's very good would be the Strike King Tour Grade swim jig. This one particularly I really like because it has two features that are more than the Dirty Jig. So it's got two rattles that come built in. And the best thing about the bait is that it has this wire keeper on the back. So when you thread your trailer on, this keeper keeps the trailer up on the hook. So as you're jerking it and twitching it through grass, the trailer doesn't fall down, bury the hook, and you can land fish. Now, the thing about a swim jig is a lot of times you're not always trying to imitate a crawfish. You would think, a jig on the bottom, a crawfish. With a swim jig, you're really trying to imitate either bluegills, a shad, or crawfish. Sometimes a perch. If you're up north, you're fishing patterns for yellow perch. Particularly, swim jigs work really well up north around docks, grass, lily pads, timber, really anywhere a bass is positioned. We're using this tool to cover water with, and it's almost a finesse presentation for the fish. Now, if you're from the, let's say, Kentucky Lake region, Pickwick, any in the TVA, then you're probably familiar with this next one, which is called your football jig, okay? Football jigs have a head that's shaped just like a football, and what this jig really is used for, okay, is for skating over rocks and open water and dragging a jig along the bottom, okay? They are less prone to hang up with this style head because it's wider, so it doesn't get in the crevices of the rocks. One of the most productive things when I was fishing a tournament out in Kentucky and Barkley Lakes was what we call stroking a jig. So I was using a 3/4 or 1 ounce jig. I was fishing a ledge, and a ledge is nothing more than a hump or a bar or a formation of land that current rolls over. And I would cast the bait out, and I would let it hit the bottom, and I would snap the rod tip up high. And what that would do would trigger a response from the bass, and they would instantly bite it. So football jigs are something that I use when I'm fishing 10 to 30 feet of water, okay, when I need to get to the bottom really fast because they are heavy, and when I'm trying to trigger a reaction strike. So one of the biggest downfalls of a football jig, okay, is the fact that when a fish bites it and comes up and jumps, the heavy head, sometimes I can lose fish. So landing fish on the football jig can sometimes be a challenge for me. The last one I want to touch on before I go over trailers is the chatterbait, or the vibrating jig. And there's a couple of them out there. So there's the Mullick's Lover, there is the chatterbait. There's about 100 different knockoffs that are out there these days, but really the tried and true winner is the chatterbait. And what makes this thing special is that you basically cast it out and reel it in, and it's like a crankbait, that it has a bill that works back and forth. But when you have your chatterbait, my personal favorite trailer to put on the back is a Zoom Super Fluke Junior. It has a swimming shad-like tail for the back, and you just simply thread the bait on to the jig. And then you slide it up. It has a nice keeper for it, and now you have a profiled bait. And the reason I really like this swimming jig or swimming bait on the back of here is it's not very bulky, so it doesn't kill the side-to-side action of the bait. When I use, say, I've seen people use like rage crawls and things like that, what I've found is that it kills some of the action of the blade because it's too much plastic in the water. On the topic of trailers, really there's only 2 trailers that I use on my jigs no matter where I go, okay? The number one that I use 80 to 90% of the time is the Rage Chunk. If you haven't tried them, you need to try them. They will be life-changing in your jig fishing. You can fish them on the Finesse Jig, you can fish them on the Swim Jig, and you can fish them on the Football Jig. They work on everything, okay? The other variation of that is the Pack-A-Crawl. Again, about 10 to 20% of the time I use a Pack-A-Crawl. Typically when I use a Pack-A-Crawl, I'm fishing a swim jig. And the reason for it is because I want to keep the bait off the bottom. So what happens is a rage crawl, the bait will sink faster because there's less resistance in the tails. With a Pack-A-Crawl, because you have these big flappy arms, the bait actually falls slower. So it allows the bait to be in the water column longer. So jigs rock. I mean, the bottom line is that they are just a phenomenal bait. They catch larger than average fish. As always, on the next module, we have all of these jigs listed so you can view them in the pictures. So if you need to, the pictures are clickable. Click on the link if you'd like to order some yourself. But you know, any fisherman that is fishing a tournament and they get on a jig bite is going to be a difficult fisherman to beat in that tournament, simply because big fish eat jigs. So if you're really trying to up your game, you know, trying to go from a plastic worm into the jig, you know, I really recommend starting with the Finesse Jig with a Rage Crawl, and I can tell you, you won't be disappointed. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.